Poor girl is rejected at the interview for arriving by bicycle. Even the company owner passes her on the way out, and no one expected what he would say next. She arrived sweating, her pants stained with mud and her hands trembling, clutching an old folder that made a broken zipper sound. In the glass reception area, the company employees glanced at her as if she were a grotesque error in the luxurious setting. One of the attendants whispered, "By bike? Seriously?" Everyone laughed. The interview, scheduled for 9 a.m., was already 15 minutes late, but no one called her. One of the directors made a point of passing by, coughing falsely, staring at her thinness as if it were an affront to the imported carpet. When the door finally opened, the HR manager didn't even try to hide it. "Sorry, we didn't think you'd come. The position's already filled." She simply thanked him in a choked voice and left, trying to pedal with dignity as laughter echoed through the mirrored windows. It was at that exact moment on the way out that a man got out of a black car and stopped in front of her, and no one expected what he would say next. The tall man, in a dark suit and a neutral expression, stared directly at her bicycle. In silence, the employees inside the company began to stand up to look through the window. "Did you come for the programmer interview?" he asked, emotionless. She simply nodded shyly. He then looked at the security guard nearby and said, "Write down her name. The position is hers now. And bring me the resume you ignored." A complete silence fell over the reception area. Some recoiled as if they'd been slapped in the face. She, not understanding, could only ask, "But why?" And he replied, meeting all the curious gazes behind the glass, "Because I know how to recognize someone who's had to struggle with what they have, and that's worth more than any nice suit in here." From that moment on, something changed. But no one had any idea who that girl really was. Not even him. Before continuing, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and like this video so you can continue receiving our real stories. Thank you very much. Her routine began before sunrise. The alarm would ring at 4:30 a.m., and with it, the familiar sound of the ceiling dripping onto the blue basin. Her old bicycle, parked next to the door, already had a flat tire, but she learned to pump enough air to reach the city center. On each route, the buildings grew like unreachable castles, and she kept going, dodging puddles, hurried cars, and eyes that never lingered on her. Her hands, always stained with grease, betrayed her daily struggle. No one there knew her name, and maybe that was for the best. The room she shared with her sick aunt smelled of ointment and mildew. The overdue bills stuck with magnets to the refrigerator created a sad mosaic of survival. But she always smiled when she left, her pants ironed and her white blouse neatly tucked in. There was hope in her eyes. Hope that this day at that company might be different. She would pass the display windows of the expensive coffee shops and just watch. She knew she didn't belong in that world, yet. But something inside her insisted on trying. When she arrived at the tech giant's reception, she felt the weight of her own reflection in the tinted windows. People in suits and heels hurried past, completely ignoring the young woman with a worn backpack and bicycle leaning in a corner. She introduced herself to the receptionist with a shy smile and the name of the position. The woman didn't even hide her disdain. She typed something slowly on the computer, asked to wait, and didn't even offer water. She tried to remain calm. She knew her resume was good, that she studied at night with a scholarship, and had done brilliant projects with limited internet access. But none of this was reflected in her simple clothes, her hair tied back with a crooked clip, or her worn shoes. There, no one saw talent. They only saw the bike leaning against it, and that was enough to make the label stick. In the glass-enclosed room, HR was shuffling papers around. At one point, she heard someone say, "Is the girl with the bike still there?" Followed by muffled laughter. She swallowed hard, checked her watch. Half an hour had already passed, and when the door finally opened, the words hit her like a punch. "Sorry, we thought you wouldn't come. We've already finalized the process." She didn't cry. She just nodded, picked up her briefcase and pedaled slowly away. And it was at that exact moment, between the exit gate and the first traffic light, that the company owner passed her, looking directly into the eyes of that invisible girl. Her name was Elisa, but few people used it. She grew up in a neighborhood where the streets had more potholes than sidewalks, and the windows had more bars than flowers. Her father, a veteran who never returned from the war in one piece, disappeared when she was 7. All that remained were her mother, exhausted and bitter, and her younger brother Davy, whom she carried in her arms, as if it were her personal mission to keep him afloat in a world that tried hard to push them down. Her childhood was filled with silence, lines at the health center, and nights where dinner was just the hope that the next day would bring something better. Elisa taught herself to read with pamphlets and old newspapers. She discovered early on that intelligence could be a weapon, but also a burden when born in the wrong place. Her teachers adored her, for her effort, her sharp questions, her restless soul that shone even when covered in dust. At 13, when her mother fell ill and the house fell silent, she took on the role no one asked her to, caring for her aunt, cleaning, feeding Davy, and studying in the wee hours by the light of a street lamp. She never complained. There was something in her pain that transformed into resilient silence, a strength that didn't need shouting to be felt. It was in one of these silences that she swore before her brother, still a child, "You're going to study. You're going to get out of here. I'll find a way." And while he slept, she daydreamed about coding, technology, and a computer she'd never owned. She began using the ones at the public library. She watched videos, took free courses, and created her first website on a computer with a shaky screen and a keyboard missing keys. And even with everything against him, he passed the admissions process for a public university. He cycled to night classes, returned after midnight, and even woke up early to work as a receptionist at a cheap motel. Every penny counted. Every book was devoured. He thirsted for something he couldn't even name, but felt it deep inside him like a calling. When the opening at that tech company came up, she knew it wasn't just a job. It was the chance to turn a new leaf. She didn't want luxury. She wanted dignity. She wasn't seeking revenge, but justice for the girl who once cried in secret because she didn't have a notebook. She prepared her resume with great care, revised it 1,000 times, printed it at the local print shop, wore the best clothes she had, and rode her bike, because the money for the ride came from her brother's food. She had every reason to give up, but she chose to keep going. The world might not see her, but she had seen enough pain to know she wouldn't stop until she changed her story. What Elisa didn't yet know was that that morning, the door the world had closed to her would be reopened by a stranger, and this stranger had a past intertwined with hers long before that encounter. The company's waiting room was chilly, not only because of the overly strong air conditioning, but also because of the ambiance. The modern chairs contrasted with the worn backpack on Elisa's lap. She clenched her fingers, nervous but determined. The gazes of the other candidates, all well-dressed, with sharp suits, state-of-the-art laptops and confident smiles, fell on her as if trying to guess where that displaced puzzle piece came from. As she waited, she heard whispers. One of the young men laughed out loud. "I wonder if she's here to fix some executive's bike." Others laughed. She pretended not to hear. She looked ahead, fixed her gaze on the wall sign with the company name in brushed steel letters, Lynx Corp Innovations. This was more than a building. It was a dream, and she wasn't going to back down. Minutes later, the door opened, and a man in a tie appeared, calling for the next candidate. When he saw Elisa, he frowned. "You are here for the junior developer position?" he asked, as if confirming something absurd. She nodded, trying to keep her tone firm. "Yes, sir, my name is on the list." He shuffled through the papers, pursed his lips and said, "Wait a minute." She stood there for almost 40 minutes. An employee walked past her and whispered to another, "You bet 100. She'll be fired without even coming in." The other responded with a laugh. She already came in through the wrong door. Elisa swallowed hard. She stood up and walked to the reception door. The receptionist ignored her for several long seconds until she said, without taking her eyes off her phone, "The position has been filled." The girl tried to argue, "But I was called for an interview. I have emails. I confirmed the time." The woman cut her off coldly. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? But HR decided to close the process. Maybe you can try again next time." Behind her she heard laughter again. "At least she has a bike, right? She won't waste her Uber ride crying," someone commented. And the laughter spread like invisible barbs, wounding a part of her that had been trying to heal for years. She thanked him, her voice breaking, and turned, walking toward the door with steps too firm for the weight she carried. But outside, fate awaited. A black car stopped just ahead, and a man got out, removing his sunglasses with an analytical expression. He didn't look like just another executive. People inside the company stirred at the sight of him. Some hurried to straighten their posture. Others simply froze. He passed Elisa, still on the sidewalk. He stared at her for several seconds, then at the bike. His eyes for a moment seemed to recognize something. Then he spoke slowly, in a firm voice. "You're Elisa, right?" She nodded, surprised. "You came for the junior developer position?" She nodded with a barely audible yes. He took a deep breath, turned to the security guard and said, "Write down her name. The position is hers now." The words fell like thunder. Inside the building, silence gripped the reception area like an invisible storm, and in the background, in the reflection of the windows, some realized the company owner had just broken all the rules for a girl everyone had mocked. She didn't understand right away. She thought she'd heard wrong, that perhaps the man had confused her name, her presence, her life. But no. He looked at her again with eyes that seemed to have read more than the resume hidden in her backpack. "Come with me, Elisa," he said, with a calmness that defied all her inner chaos. The security guard hesitantly opened the main gate, and so, for the first time, she entered that building not as an ignored shadow, but as someone being seen. The looks were different now. The receptionist swallowed. The staff hid their discomfort, and even the laughter ceased, as if something bigger was happening, and no one wanted to be the next to be noticed by the owner's steady gaze. He led her to a private elevator. The silence inside was thick. Elisa clutched the strap of her backpack, unsure whether to thank him, ask a question, run away, or cry. On the 23rd floor, the door opened onto a spacious room, lit by windows that seemed to touch the sky. A conference table waited empty. In the center sat a laptop, a glass of water, and two name tags, one with her name, the other with his, Nathaniel Hawthorne, CEO. Her eyes widened. This didn't make sense. Why would someone like him? "Do you think a bike diminishes your capabilities?" he asked, not looking at her, just watching the city beyond the glass. She tried to answer, but her voice wouldn't come. "I saw you coming. I saw how they looked at you. And I recognized the look you carried." He turned then, and there was something in his eyes, an invisible scar that also said, "I was once you." Elisa, without realizing it, let a tear fall, but it was he who first lowered his eyes. "They don't know what you've gone through to be here, but I know, because I, too, had to cross worlds before putting on this suit." She told her story briefly. No drama, no exaggeration, just the facts, the bicycle, the brother, the absent mother, the public college, the codes written in internet cafes, and the projects erased due to power outages, and the promise that she would never let anyone decide her worth by what she wore or what she had in her pocket. Nathaniel listened in silence, and when she finished, he simply said, "Room 5B is yours, and the computer will be on at 8 a.m. She didn't know whether to smile or run. But in that moment she felt something different, belonging. The elevator took her down again, this time with a different posture. The same people who had mocked her avoided her eyes. The receptionist tried a fake smile, but she simply passed. Not out of revenge, but because she was already on another level. At the door she glanced at her bicycle, and it was impossible not to smile. That bike had been the ticket to the biggest turning point of her life. But what no one there knew, not even Nathaniel, was that their meeting was no coincidence, and the secret she was keeping could turn everything upside down. The news spread like wildfire. That same afternoon, the company hallways were buzzing. The girl on the bike, hired directly by the CEO, they whispered in the corners. Some were indignant, others snickered, but everyone, without exception, was uncomfortable. Elisa noticed the sidelong glances, the muffled whispers, the conversations interrupted as she passed. She walked with an upright posture, but inside she still trembled, not from the fear of making a mistake, but from the pain of seeing how well prejudice was disguised in expensive suits and perfume. On the third day, while she was focused on her computer, she received a meeting invitation. The title was Surprise Technical Assessment, Senior Team Integration. She found it strange but accepted. When she arrived at the room, she found 5 employees at the table, all men, all from different departments, and all with that same lopsided smile she knew all too well. "We're here to see if you truly deserve the position you've been given," one of them said, with a tone of false cordiality. "Don't take it personally. It's just that, well, you arrived in a rather unusual way." She smiled, but inside her blood was boiling. They'd given her a technical challenge live on the big screen, real-time coding, under pressure. They thought they were setting an ambush. But Elisa was used to coding amid the noise of the street, with children screaming and lights flashing. She read the problem, took a deep breath, and started typing. Her fingers raced across the keyboard. The logic was clear, the solution elegant. In less than 12 minutes, she completed the task, explaining each line didactically and clearly. When she finished, she turned to the table and said, "If you have one more, I have time." One of them cleared his throat. Another pretended to look for something on his laptop. But everyone knew she had humiliated the humiliation. As we left the room, however, a phrase was said with disguised venom. "You know, bike or not, in the end, you're still just another one who will disappear when the dust settles." She didn't answer. But something inside her shifted, not because of the words, but because she recognized that tone. She'd heard it before somewhere else in another life, and that's when she realized that man, the one who said that, she knew him, and that would change everything. That night, Elisa didn't go straight home. She stopped at the old bridge overlooking the river, the same place she used to take her brother to breathe when life got tough. She leaned her bike against the wall and let the cold wind touch her face. The words spoken in that room echoed like a barely buried memory. "In the end, you're still just another person." But it wasn't just the content. It was the voice, the arrogant manner, the restrained mockery. She knew it, because I'd heard it before. Not just then, but years ago, in a moment that marked her life like an invisible scar. She opened her laptop and searched the company's internal system, name by name, face by face, until she confirmed it. The man who had coordinated the surprise technical evaluation was the same man who years before had volunteered for a social program that visited public schools. He had come to her school when she was just 15. At the time, she had entered a school science fair with an automation project made from scrap metal parts and recycled boards. He vividly remembered the moment at the presentation when he looked at the project and said, in front of everyone, "This is cute, but these ideas are just for decorating junk. You should think about something more realistic, like making candy to sell." It was that day she hid the project out of shame and nearly gave up on technology. It took weeks for her to courageously return to her studies. And now, years later, that same man, without remembering her, was trying once again to bury her under the weight of contempt. But this time, she was no longer the girl who backed away. Now, she was the CEO's direct employee. She had an office, a key, a corporate email address, with her name printed in capital letters, and above all, she had knowledge. Elisa spent the next few days in silence. She didn't tell anyone what she remembered. She continued to do her job with excellence, attending meetings, delivering projects, building her reputation through merit, not favor. But inside her, her heart beat like an ancient drum, because she knew. She knew what that man had done, and she knew that sooner or later he would remember it too. On Friday, during a board lunch, Nathaniel called her to present a pilot project. And when she entered the room full of executives, the same man from the evaluation was sitting at the side of the table. When he saw her, his expression darkened. She noticed, and in that instant, she looked him in the eye. Not with anger, but with memory. The silence between them lasted only 3 seconds, but it was enough. He lowered his eyes, and she understood. He remembered. That night, something broke inside him. David Langston, the principal who'd tried to humiliate her, left the building as if fleeing a ghost. He sat in his car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and replayed the scene in his mind with painful clarity. It wasn't possible. That girl was the same skinny girl with her hair tied with a paper elastic who had once looked at him with a gleam in her eyes, begging for recognition at the science fair of a forgotten suburban school. She had asked with genuine innocence, "Do you think I can make it in this field, sir?" And he, without even thinking, laughed. He said it was a waste of time, that the best someone like her could achieve was making homemade cakes and selling them door to door. He remembered perfectly, not because of the girl, but because of the feeling of empowerment he'd felt. She was just another poor kid, and he was a volunteer in a tie with a shiny badge. But now she was on the same floor, with a badge, just like his. Meanwhile, at the top of the building, Nathaniel observed Elisa for the first time with full attention, that calm, that poise. There was something different about her, something he knew well, the quiet strength of someone forged in pain. The next morning, the CEO asked HR for Elisa's complete information. Origin, school, background. He read everything carefully. When he got to the point about the science fair and the scrap metal automation project, he froze. The name David Langston appeared in the report. As a visiting mentor, the connection was clear. Elisa had never mentioned it. She had never used the past as currency. She had never tried to expose anyone. Nathaniel was silent for long minutes. He remembered when he himself was snubbed in an interview for wearing his father's old shoes. He remembered the first time he slept in a storage room so he could save money to start his own business. He remembered all the times he had been invisible and recognized the same in Elisa. Later he called David for an informal chat. No accusations. Just a cold comment. Interesting how the world turns, isn't it? Sometimes the ones we ignore become our shadow. David tried to justify himself, saying he couldn't remember clearly, but the truth had already sunk in. And that late afternoon, Nathaniel saw Elisa leaving again on her bike, the same one as always, but now with an aura of someone who no longer carried just herself. She carried the truth. He watched her until she disappeared over the horizon, and he began to understand that she wasn't there by luck. She was there because fate was finally settling old scores. On Monday, her desk was empty. Her laptop was turned off. No note, no email, no explanation. The only thing left was her name tag on the desk, lined up with almost ceremonial precision. The front desk couldn't explain it. HR said she hadn't formally resigned, she just hadn't returned. Nathaniel found it strange. He spent the day restless. He called personally, but the call went to voicemail. He sent a message, and the blue checkmark appeared. Unanswered. Her silence, once so admirable, now bothered him, and for the first time in years, the CEO of a billion-dollar company found himself distracted in meetings, his thoughts wandering to a girl on a bicycle who spoke little but said everything with her eyes. David Langston, on the other hand, sighed with relief. Maybe she realized she didn't belong there, he commented teasingly in the boardroom. But Nathaniel didn't respond. He just stared at him for a second longer than necessary. Days passed. Her absence began to leave a void no one knew how to fill. Other employees began to comment. She was brilliant. She never got a code wrong. There was something about her different. The same ones who laughed began to miss her. Elisa's name, once a source of whispers, now surfaced in praise and even comparisons. Nathaniel, intrigued, decided to go to her registered address in person. It was a remote neighborhood where buses didn't come often. Upon arriving, he found only his aunt on the porch in a rusty wheelchair. The woman recognized him immediately and smiled with restrained surprise. She simply said, "She left 2 days ago. Said she needed to breathe." He tried to insist, to ask if he had done something wrong, if someone had offended her. But his aunt, wise and serene, replied, "She didn't leave. She's just letting the world feel the weight of her absence." On the way back, Nathaniel couldn't think of anything else. He'd never realized how much of a difference someone so discreet could make. He who had always believed in efficiency, results, and numbers now thought about presence. And Elisa's presence was more than physical. It was moral. It was symbolic. It was confrontational. Meetings became emptier. The project she had started stalled. No one could continue with the same fluidity. And even with all the technological tools available, no one could predict when or if she would return. But what no one imagined is that the reason for her departure wasn't pain. It was something much deeper. The first article appeared in a small digital magazine, the kind no one takes seriously until it goes viral. Employee disappears after veiled humiliation inside tech giant. Silence as response. The journalist, a former college classmate of Elisa's, had received an anonymous email with details of the so-called surprise evaluation and excerpts from internal conversations that demonstrated contempt for her record. No one knew who sent it, but the truth spread like wildfire. In less than 48 hours, major portals replicated the story. Headlines like "The Girl on the Bike and the Silent CEO" and "David Langston, the man who laughed at genius," dominated feeds. A video of the press conference, where she was dismissed before she even entered, went viral. Yes, someone at reception had filmed it to mock it, but now the video was being shared with outrage. The world applauded her silent determination and demanded action from the company, HR, and especially David. Pressure mounted. Investors began sending emails questioning the company's culture. Hashtags like "Elisa now Mero" and "Respect Talento" took over X, formerly Twitter. Tech groups began mentioning the case at conferences and forums. University students staged symbolic demonstrations in front of the Lynx Corp building, with bicycles painted white as a symbol of resistance. David Langston was temporarily suspended. A vague corporate statement attempted to calm tensions, but the damage was done. One of the startups using the company's APIs terminated its contract, citing ethical inconsistency. One of the board members suggested an emergency meeting to re-evaluate senior leadership positions. Nathaniel remained silent for 3 days. He gave no interviews, appeared in public, or posted anything. But inside his office he watched and re-watched the video of the reception, the one where Elisa, briefcase in hand and bicycle leaning against the gate, was ignored. Each time he watched it, something gnawed at him. He couldn't name the feeling, but it was old, familiar, maybe regret, maybe shame. At the end of the week, he published an open letter, written in his own hand. He didn't justify himself. He didn't defend himself. He simply acknowledged his failure to protect a talent everyone had overlooked, and that, even though he gave her the opportunity, he couldn't prevent the system from crushing her from within. The letter's repercussions divided opinions. Some applauded the humility, others called it an attempt to clean up the image. But everyone agreed on one thing. Elisa, even in her absence, had provoked an ethical earthquake within one of the country's largest corporations. And meanwhile, in a small cafe inside, she read it all in silence, her bicycle leaning against the side of the table. He wasn't seeking applause. He just wanted to remind herself that sometimes disappearing is the loudest scream anyone can give. Nathaniel has always been a man of quick decisions, logical reasoning, and aggressive goals. He grew up under pressure, led his first company at 27, and by 32 had already sold 2 startups to Silicon Valley giants. His life was measured in charts, projections, profits, and results. But after Elisa's disappearance, something he never understood began to occupy him. Emptiness. At first, he tried to rationalize it. He told himself that employees come and go, that strong people know how to navigate the market. But every time I walked past the room where she used to be, always clean, organized, with handwritten post-its, I felt something aching and unnamed. He began walking around the company more. He ditched the private elevator and started using the stairs. He stopped to chat with interns, receptionists, and IT technicians. He discovered, to his surprise, that many felt invisible, that the culture he once found modern and inspiring was, for those below, toxic and elitist. In one of these, Conversations. An employee tearfully recounted that only Elisa called her by her first name. She offered me coffee on the first day. She said I looked tired and that it wasn't a flaw. Nathaniel listened in silence. And for the first time, he understood that his company, his empire, was made up of people afraid to be human. He started arriving earlier and leaving later. He traded his suit for a simple shirt. He had the glass room removed and moved his desk to the same floor as the development. Team. He cancelled contracts with suppliers known for abusive practices. He created a policy of real inclusion, not just pamphlets, but no change seemed enough. At night, I reviewed videos of her speaking in meetings, the calm way she responded to criticism, her confident gaze even when she was scorned. He began to realize that Elisa wasn't just an employee. She was a reflection of what he had forgotten he was. One morning, she left alone in her car and walked to the bridge where she parked her bicycle. She parked, got out and stood there. The wind bit her face and the city seemed distant. Then, for the first time since her adolescence, she cried. Not for the stock market, not for the lost contracts, but for having allowed someone like her to struggle alone, even after being welcomed. The next day he called a general meeting. No slides, no speeches. He simply stood up and said, "Starting today, this company will change, because I have changed, and anyone who wants to continue, pretending that merit is measured by appearance can leave now." He received a standing ovation, but deep down he knew none of this would have happened if it weren't for her, the girl on the bike, the one he'd barely known, and who now inhabited every corner of his consciousness. The reunion happened in the most unlikely way possible, as if the universe had been waiting for the exact moment when the two were ready to face what had been left in suspense. It was an ordinary afternoon, with a dull sky and the wind carrying dry leaves through the streets of Brooklyn. Nathaniel, exhausted from a conference, decided to walk alone to the coffee shop where, long ago, he used to write his first business plans. Nostalgia led him there almost instinctively. As he entered, the doorbells jingled like in an old movie, and then he stopped. She was there, sitting by the window, headphones in, typing on an old laptop, a cup of tea beside her, and her bike, yes, the same one, leaning against the sidewalk rack. For a moment the world seemed to lose its sound. Nathaniel stood there watching, unsure whether to approach or respect the silence she had created. But as if sensing it, Elisa looked up. The two stared at each other for long seconds. There was no accusation, no open resentment, just memory, just presence. He approached with slow steps. She calmly removed her headphones. He didn't say anything right away. He sat across from her, as if he were standing before something sacred. "You're gone," he said finally, his voice more human than it had ever been. "I needed to," she replied, simply, directly. "You caused a silent revolution," he said. "Without raising your voice, you shook the ground of people who never imagined themselves on their knees." She looked at him firmly. "I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for myself, and for everyone who comes after. I don't want the next girl on a bike to have to endure what I did." He nodded. His words came softer, almost a whisper. "You taught me what no MBA could. You reminded me that talent doesn't wear heels, that genius doesn't ask for permission." She then interrupted him. "I'm not here for applause, Nathaniel. I just want to know if what you're changing is real, or just marketing hype." And that's when he broke down. He said he hadn't slept well since she left, that he had transformed the company's structure, that he had fired the arrogant and made room for the invisible, that he wasn't seeking forgiveness, but a fresh start. The silence between them for a moment was full of everything. Then she closed her laptop, stood up slowly, and asked, "What if I told you I didn't come here by accident?" Nathaniel frowned in confusion. She pointed to the bicycle. "There's a startup over there in the Latino neighborhood with no Wi-Fi but full of amazing kids. They don't need pity, they need opportunity, and someone like you can open that door. The question is, will you come in with me, or will you keep lecturing from afar?" He was speechless, but he stood up. And finally they walked together down the narrow street, side by side, she with her bicycle, he with his tie in his pocket. The invitation hung in the air like a bridge between two worlds. She didn't apologize, she didn't beg for attention. She simply offered a path. And he, without saying a word, accepted. In the following days, Nathaniel showed up at that small startup in the Latino neighborhood as if he were just another volunteer. He arrived early, cleaned tables, listened to stories, helped set up old machines. He never said who he was. He never talked about Lynx Corp. Elisa watched him from a distance, neither praising nor censuring. She wanted to see how far this new man would go, whether he had truly changed or merely repainted the old walls of his own consciousness. She, in turn, declined 2 invitations to officially return to Lynx Corp. She said it wasn't time yet. There's still a lot of dust under the glass mats. But she agreed to work as an external consultant, focusing on inclusion and training of peripheral talent. And she imposed one non-negotiable condition: complete freedom. Nathaniel didn't just accept. He asked her to rewrite the company's entire hiring policy. Her name became a silent reference. In the hallways, when someone made a prejudiced comment, he simply said, "Watch out, she might hear." But there was something he still couldn't understand. Why, even after everything, did she never fully return? Why did she always remain just a step away? It was on a rainy night, as they were driving back from an event on education and technology, that he asked. They were in the car, and she, looking out the window, replied, "Because I still hear the laughter from that first day. That welcome, those eyes, it hasn't healed yet." Nathaniel gripped the steering wheel. "And what can I do?" She smiled, tired, but genuine. "Nothing. Some pains don't require healing. They require respect." The silence. Afterward wasn't heavy. It was liberating. He understood. And she, for the first time, knew he understood. The following month, she turned down a multi-million-dollar offer from abroad. Not because she lacked ambition, but because she now knew the value of what she was building here. And more than that, she knew that remaining the girl on the bike was her greatest shield, her greatest weapon. On the company's founding anniversary, she received a formal invitation to speak. She walked through the front door dressed in a simple blouse, jeans, and sneakers. She took the stage, faced all the executives who once ignored her, many now replaced, and said, "I'm not here because I needed the company. I'm here because the company needed me." And so many others are still at the door, waiting for someone to see them beyond what they wear or carry. Maybe the next revolution is right now parked on a bicycle outside. A standing ovation. But when she got off the stage, she walked alone. Still light. Still hers. Nathaniel tried to get closer again. "What now?" he asked hopefully. She looked at him tenderly but firmly. "Now you walk on your own 2 feet. And I keep pedaling." The wind danced softly on that grey morning. In front of Lynx Corp's headquarters, now renovated with gardens and access ramps where before there had been only cold marble, an old bicycle sat leaning against the front door. No one knew for sure who had left it there. It had no lock, no name, no ticket, but no one dared touch it. Inside, in the central hallway, a chair stood purposefully empty in the meeting room. Above it rested a name tag engraved in silver with the name Elisa M., reflecting the sunlight streaming in through the windows. The hushed space held a reverence that required no words. In the lobby, a new sign had replaced the company's old mission statement. It now read, "Where there is talent, there is a path." Employees came and went, many from forgotten neighborhoods, with simple backpacks, watchful eyes, and dreams bigger than their resumes. They were hired for potential, not looks, for history, not last name. Nathaniel walked the halls unescorted, his shirt rolled up to his elbows, his eyes alert to each new face. He stopped to listen to ideas, to learn. But sometimes, unseen, he glanced out the window and searched the streets for any sign of that figure who had once cycled in and left quietly, leaving everything upside down. Outside, in another part of the city, a new classroom was filling with young people learning programming logic with recycled components. And ahead of them, a woman with a serene gaze and gentle firmness moved from table to table, correcting code, pointing out directions, smiling. She never gave her full name, never spoke of the past. But at the back of the room, on a simple shelf, a small replica of a rusty bicycle rested. Beside it, a wooden sign read, "When they laugh at how you get there, smile. They don't know where you're going." If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. So comment below, "Never underestimate a bicycle." That way I'll know who really stayed until the end. Please enjoy and leave a like, as it really helps this type of content reach more people who need to hear stories like this. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting twists and turns that are already coming. And now, click on the video that's appearing on your screen. It has another story. That will move you, maybe even more than this one. I'll see you there.